Let's put our living stereo stylus in this groove.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our BDI Empower webinar. We are going to be talking about why virtual events are here to stay. When the pandemic hit in March of last year, we turned to video conferencing platforms like never before, right, to meet with one another virtually. And you met with your staff and your board, and you communicated with your donors, and many of you moved forward with even event fundraising opportunities virtually, right? So While there's no substitute to meeting face to face, here we are on a virtual platform meeting once again. Virtual platforms have been with us and they're here to stay. And I think there are more and more ways that we can employ them. So they help us keep in touch today. And we're here to explore how, even post pandemic, how virtual events can support our work in the ministry. Surely you've noticed that we've mixed things up again this time. We're delivering this webinar live to you on Facebook and via YouTube to showcase how events might look live via these platforms. And maybe you've already experienced that, but we thought we'd mix it up and give you a little bit of a different experience. However you're joining us today, please feel free to submit your questions right here on Facebook or on YouTube, and we will endeavor to get them all answered. Okay, well, today we are thrilled to introduce to you Steffi Ewing from Global Village, Inc. Global Village is one of BDI's trusted partner agencies, and Steffi brings depth of talent and 20 years of experience in nonprofit, strategic planning, marketing, film and digital media to our ears and to our eyes today. So welcome, Steffi. We're excited to have you join us. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about what you're up to, and let's get going with this awesome topic.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Lolly. I appreciate it. It's great to be here with you all today. As Lolly mentioned, I am with Global Village. Global Village is a production company and a digital marketing agency. Our heart really does beat nonprofit, and so while we have done a little in the regular commercial space too, we've largely been focused on nonprofit. And me specifically, my career has very much been probably 85% nonprofit and fundraising. And I know that's of great interest, and certainly how that pairs up with virtual events is an interesting discussion. So when the pandemic hit a couple of years, are we into year number 2 at this point? It feels like a couple of years ago. When the pandemic hit, we were uniquely positioned to be able to serve that need, the need of helping to develop virtual events. Not only with the production company experience that we have, but with our focus on digital media and digital marketing, it was just kind of a perfect mix. We've done a little bit of it already. Education has a lot of digital media type virtual event space already, but the pandemic happening as it did with our unique experience really positioned us to start serving our clients in a different way. Everybody was looking at each other saying, what do we do? We have an event planned in May and it's March and we're in lockdown. That was our very first kind of pandemic virtual event experience, as we had a client reach out to us and say, gosh, we have a walk planned that we do every year, and it's already planned and we've booked it all, and it's going to be at the Santa Monica Pier. And here we are finding that people are going to be all in lockdown. What do we do? And so it was really kind of a pivotal moment for us. I know we've used the word pivot a lot over the last couple of years, but it really was a pivotal moment for Global Village to just say, hey, this is an area where I think we can really empower what you're doing, boost up your fundraising, still keep it interesting and fun. And from there've been a myriad of events over the last couple of years.
So Steffi, what did that look like when organizations started coming to you and saying, what do we do? How do you get started? What are some of the first things you need to be considering if you want to do a virtual event?
That's one of the very first things you should even think about when you're talking about a virtual event at all. So I did put together a little slide here for us to go over of things that really are key things to consider. This is by no means an exhaustive list of any kind, but things that if you can keep these your answers to these questions in mind as we go through the rest of the talk today, will really help make each of the points really relevant. So first and foremost, and I think this is true of any event, not just a virtual event, you have to know what's your goal. What would make your event a success? Is it fundraising? Is it awareness? Is it participation? Is it people joining in and sharing? Is it broadening your audience? I mean, there are a lot of different things that could be your specific goal. I think for a lot of people, it has been fundraising, but really understanding what would make the event a success is the very first place to start, because you can't really answer any of those questions until you have that in mind. So once you have your why, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? The next question would be, what is the nature of your event? Is it going to be a walk or a run? Is it a gala made virtual? Is it do you need to incorporate things like silent auction or a peer-to-peer fundraiser? Is it what we're doing right now? Is it a webinar? Is it educational? So kind of understanding what is the nature of your event. And then from there, also understanding, is this an entirely new event to your organization? Are you innovating something different? Or is this you've always done a gala every fall, and now you're finding yourself where you're not able to, so you want to find a way to translate that gala you've done from in person to online. So really understanding what the nature of your event is and how you would like to structure it is a key question to ask as well. The next question for me would be, what is your audience? Who is your audience? Who are you trying to reach out to? Is it your current base, people who know you well? Is it broadening to somebody else? And then even as important as that is, how do you currently interact with them? Because that might help define how you continue to interact with them in this virtual event space. So is your audience tech savvy? That's a really important question to ask, because obviously virtual events rely on tech. So how will your audience respond to that? Do they need it as simple as I got to click one button and I'm not asked to do anything else? Or are they a little bit more savvy and they may be able to start giving online? They can participate in a silent auction online. Really understanding what the limitations are. And then if you do have limitations in your audience, you can plan ahead for them. So understanding that is quite key as well. On that same note would be, what action steps do you want your audience to take? That kind of goes back to, what is your goal? What's the nature of the event? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Do you want people to click on that donate button? Do you want them to do it on the night of the event, or do you want them to do it ahead of time? Is the event really a celebration of fundraising ahead of time, or are you anticipating raising funds on that specific evening or that specific day? Maybe that's not what you want them to do at all. Maybe you want them to bid on something. Maybe you want them to share this. Maybe you want them to sign up for something else. Maybe this is informational and you're getting them to sign up to be, whether it's a monthly partner or commit to volunteer. What action step do you want them to take? And how you need to know that so you can figure out how to make that easy once you get to the event itself, that it's a click of a button or it's a very easy call to action. I know we all know how important calls to action are, and virtual events are no different. The next one's kind of an interesting question. What are your internal resources? And yes, we all know who our teams are, who our speakers might be, but I think coming at it from the perspective of, how comfortable is your team in a virtual environment? Is it something where they are able to hop in and not worry about the risk of, oh my gosh, the internet might go down, or I have to speak on the fly and I'm speaking instead of to an audience? I may be wonderful speaking on stage to 500 people, but if you do that behind a camera, can they make that switch? Kind of understanding what are your resources? How are people on your team going to react to a virtual environment as opposed to an in-person environment? And are they up for the challenge, or do you need to look for resources elsewhere? If your staff is not overly technologically savvy, you may need to be partnering with someone to do the button pushing. If you are a group, run more on the anxious side, there are some ways to prepare for a virtual event that keep your nerves in check, per se, kind of mitigate some of those risks. This is a very important question to understand. Who and what are your internal resources when you're approaching a virtual event? This next question is also kind of interesting, and it's gotten a lot of debate over the last couple of years during this pandemic time, and it's, what production value would you like for your event to have? That may sound like an obvious question because, of course, everybody wants super high quality interaction, but there are a lot of considerations for that. There's obviously, the higher the production value, usually the higher the budget. Do you have the budget for that? Is that where you want to spend your dollars? Or do you feel like you're really trying to get that homegrown feeling, and so someone sending in a video on their cell phone, or a slightly lower quality video but with really great content, that part's okay? And that's an important question to answer, and there really isn't a right or a wrong. Over the last few years of doing this now, I've seen a lot of events that have been very successful with what from a production company standpoint, I go, oh gosh, that's not the quality I would really love for this to be. But at the same time, it's extremely effective because it does have that homegrown feeling. Or are you looking for something that's professionally produced? Maybe if it's entirely pre-recorded content, you may even be able to use again in the future. One thing that's been very popular, and this kind of ties into the next question, but one thing that I've seen has been very popular in virtual events in the nonprofit space over the last few years has been virtual tours. Taking folks on, what does your mission do? What does it look like? What do your constituents look like? How do you help them? And that serves not only a wonderful purpose for the event itself, but it may be content that you can use later, maybe content that you can use in other appeals, and it may have more long-term value than just the event itself, which is also an interesting consideration, especially when you get into the next question, which is what is your budget? Budget, of course, will dictate a number of things. There are lots of inexpensive and free even ways to do virtual events, fundraising included, but there are limitations to each of those things. So how much money are you willing to spend? What is it worth to you? And, and tying into that previous question, is there any way that your budget, that maybe you had a production budget, or maybe you were planning on filming some video in the coming year, can you tie that into the event so that you can soup up your virtual event at the same time come away with really great content? So, well, this is not an exhaustive list. If you can understand your answers to each of these questions and kind of keep that in the back of your head as we're going through some of the production styles and platforms and what the future looks like, it'll really help it make it a little bit more relevant for you.
Steffi, this year, I think I can safely say that everyone on this call, on this webinar, has attended some kind of a webinar event, if not a webinar event, a virtual event. If not a webinar, then a gala or a walk or a run or something. I think my taste is that one of the most interesting elements is that sort of organic feel, right? That we're almost with you, except that there's this darn screen in between us. What are the different styles, right? Because I've seen live, I've seen pre-recorded, and they have their different strengths and weaknesses. Talk to us a little bit about those styles and what you've found is effective. What are the options?
Sure. I think really it boils down to three styles. It's not an overly complicated answer in that, but you're looking at live, you're looking at pre-recorded, or you're looking at a hybrid of the two. And for me, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. And I'm going to start with live because that's what we're doing right now. And I think it's where everybody's head sort of goes, like, hey, we need to go straight into the live piece. If you're going to do an event and you want to really interact with people, it should be live. And while I agree, there are many things that you feel like you can do live that you maybe can't do in a hybrid or even a pre-recorded environment. My first response is always to kind of dissuade, like, why do you really want to do live? Like, let's dial back into what's your actual goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And does it have to be live? And one of the reasons why I say that is that when you're live, so many things have the opportunity to go wrong, things that are outside of your control.
The bloopers reel.
Yeah, the bloopers reel, oh my gosh, the internet went out, my internet isn't fast enough, I hit the wrong button, I forgot to turn the audio off or on. Or the person who gets up on stage and says, okay, I'm great in front of a stage audience, but I really feel terrible talking into a camera. It's not my strength. So you have more risks in a live environment. And so, one of the things to ask yourself is, are you up for mitigating those risks? So it's a big question to ask when you're talking about going live. Of course, the flip side of that is you do have the opportunity to be a little bit more interactive. Like we're interacting here. You're talking to me, I'm talking back. Maybe some questions are coming in and that someone has that immediate, I've asked a question and I'm getting the answer to my question right now. That might work a little bit better or be a little bit more important in an education environment or where you're trying to, turn people on to what the organization is doing without necessarily asking them to give in that moment. And that immediate feedback might be a little bit more important. But I would challenge you, if you are planning an event, to really ask yourself why you need to be live, because there's so much that can be accomplished not live, and you just make those risks a little bit smaller. You give yourself a greater opportunity to be fully successful without any hiccups. So live is definitely one way, and of course we're live right now. So here's a perfect example of what live looks like.
It seems like live, sorry to interrupt, it seems like live also has the element of being able to add more elements, more pieces to it. Like you could go to a concert and you could go here and you could go there, or live makes that more difficult is what I'm trying to say.
It does. There's a lot more to coordinate there. If you're trying to flip around from someone in South Carolina to someone in LA to someone in North Carolina to someone in Florida, they all have to be connected and interacting in some way. If you're looking at music, there's about that many more inputs you have to have for all of the audio inputs. I absolutely agree with that. I feel like you can come up with a much more diverse program if you're looking at something that is not live. On top of that, and it kind of just to touch on this, we may touch on this with the pre-recorded part as well, but you also might be able to draw some folks in that you wouldn't be able to draw in otherwise. With live, you have to have someone in a specific place at a specific time, whereas with pre-recorded, you don't. So maybe you could get a bigger get. Maybe you could have like a celebrity of some kind that might be willing to do it if they just have to send in a video, or they can do it on their own time, or they can do it from their cell phone instead of having to go to a studio versus the live piece. And so there's some important considerations. And I know I'm sounding very, very down on live, but I do think you really need to consider that question before you get going. Do you actually need to be live? And if you do you need to be live for the whole program? And that kind of brings us into hybrid. One of my favorite events that we've done over the last year was for Dream Center, the Night of Dreams. And I will share a few clips from that, but I love how the event came out, and I love how we engineered it. It was not only a mix of hybrid, both having pre-recorded and live segments, but it also was hybrid in the way the word is being used a lot more now, which is hybrid. Am I attending virtually, or am I attending in person? That word hybrid is being used more for that in the virtual event space than it is for mixing pre-recorded and live. But this event, and I'll just kind of share a few of the details because it gives you an idea of how you might do it. So the Dream Center's had a gala every year in the fall for many years, and it's their most successful and largest fundraising event. And it does usually involves a dinner. There's quite a lot of overhead, of course, like everybody would know that galas do. They have a big, fairly decent sized overhead, and it's an in-person fundraising event. They're not asking folks to give ahead of time, although some do. But it's the night of, that in the moment, that in the spirit thing that has really made their event a success in the past. And they were really wanting to hold on to some of that, to retain some of that in the moment feel, while also having a really diverse and exciting event. So the way we designed it was, first of all, it was 92 or 3% pre-recorded. It looked live though. When you go into it, it really did. It looked live. And I'll show you guys a couple of clips in just a second here. There was a stage that was all set up. All of the program kind of went through. There were stops and starts, of course, because if you messed up or you wanted to do a take again, or however you might want it, you've got that sort of live on a stage feeling. And in this case, it was a little bit unique. It actually had an audience. So they brought in, the night of that we were doing the pre-recorded session, they actually invited 20, a very small group, to make sure everybody could eat at their own tables and stay distant and feel really comfortable in this COVID era that we're in. But they had a very large room, invited about 25 of their most trusted supporters to come in, have a dinner, and then head over to the stage and actually watch the pre-recording happen. So they were part of the live audience at that point, even though it wasn't live at all. So you can hear a little bit of them in the background, and it also gave the feeling of, oh gosh, there's an audience here. This might be live. I might actually be tuning into something that's happening right now. And where they really felt the live piece was important is they wanted to be able to acknowledge donors in the moment, not just with a scroll across the screen, not just a name that came up, but for Matthew and Tommy Barnett to actually be able to say, this particular donor, thank you so much for this gift, just came in right this moment, and just being able to acknowledge that. So we programmed in 3 separate live segments, and all of the rest was pre-recorded. So let me just show you a quick clip of what that looks like. This first segment here is the pre-recorded. And I won't go too long. I can certainly share the links later if you're going to watch the whole program, but just to give you a feel for what the pre-recorded versus live looks like.
Awesome.
Oh, all right. Wow, that counts as steps on my Fitbit. Everyone, welcome to the first ever Night of Dreams virtual gala. Thank you. Now,
So you can see, you get a little bit of that. You can hear the audience in the background. So it gives you that live feeling, but that was actually all pre-recorded. And we did that intro several times. I mean, Melissa is hilarious and did her whole thing. She was very off the cuff. And we did
a lot of fun
of it, but that was a lot of fun. But then when it came time to go to the live segments, you really can't tell much of a difference. So this part was live.
Is being taught the Word of God.
Praise
Graduating the program
Isn't that
next
wonderful?
month. We'll be singing just like the guys did earlier.
Yeah.
$20,000 from Pastor Dave Summerall from iTown Church.
Wonderful.
So many pastors have built this place. And then
Yeah.
$14,000 from Pastor Jim Raley, Calvary Christian Center in Orlando, Florida. And we got one more matching gift of a huge donation that just came in. We're so blessed from Mel and Winnie Long. We are so blessed. $100,000, $30,000 total from Adopt a Bed program and other generous sponsors tonight. And $1,000 just came in. It's going to keep coming in all week long, I believe, from Newport Coast.
So you can see they really had the opportunity to specifically acknowledge donors coming in. We had a teleprompter up, and we were feeding them the names as they were going. And so people who were participating really got that, wow, my gift was just acknowledged, and acknowledged personally. Yes, I know you can accomplish that with a scroll across the screen, but it really gave them that personal touch.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
with enough pre-planning, we were really able to create a hybrid experience that was hybrid in every sense of the word. And the feedback we got from the audience was, hey, that felt live. Was that live? Like, were you guys there tonight? There was a lot of, that was what most everybody thought. And you really couldn't tell the difference between the transitions. It came down to pre-planning. There was a lot of planning required to get that just right and make sure that we didn't forget an intro or an outro as we were doing the pre-recorded part, because we couldn't do it again. And Melissa was only there the one night. She was there for pre-recording, but not for the actual, for the live event. So all in all, it was very successful. And from a fundraising perspective, too, and I'm sure that's of interest, it was their most successful fundraising events ever. So,
It's amazing because it's their first virtual. Amazing that they raised more virtually than they ever had in person.
They did, and it was a thrill. It was a thrill to be able to say that was their most successful gala. So that brings us into the last option here, which is pre-recorded. Obviously pre-recorded is what it is. We've touched a little bit on it already. It's completely canned ahead of time. Your only real opportunities for live at that moment would be if you did graphic overlays. So that's clearly something that could be done without necessarily having to take on all the risk of a fully live event. But pre-recorded, and I always want to lean towards it. I want to lean way towards pre-recorded. Coming back to what we were talking about earlier with that whole mitigating risks. If you can really dial into what are you looking to accomplish, like what are you hoping is going to happen? I mean, obviously you can't do a question and answer session live if you're in a pre-recorded situation, but you can probably still report on, you can probably still share all the things you want to about your organization, give people the opportunity to give, really have the appeal be the same way, but be able to have the opportunity to make it, to get it just right. So if it didn't come out in the moment right, you can do it again. And at the end of the day, the piece that you have usually looks quite polished. It also gives you the opportunity, like I said, to be able to bring in some guests that might not be there otherwise. It gives you the opportunity to get it just right. And coming back to that style of, what production value are you looking for? It also allows you to mix, maybe even get away with a little bit more like homegrown type. I filmed this on my iPhone and sent it in. Look, because you can do it, you can make it prettier. So like you can have someone who sent in, and this is a pet peeve of mine always when you're producing, that someone sends in a video in the vertical fashion instead of horizontal. No matter how many times you tell them, there's still always somebody who sends in a video in vertical, and it just doesn't look great, but you can fix it. You can put it inside of a spinning cell phone and then put up their name really pretty, and it takes that not so great quality video and really bumps it up into something else. And it's just an important question for you. Is that how important is the production value for you? And like I said, I've seen both ways be very successful. And I've also seen a mix of things be very successful, where some part is professionally filmed, done with the big cameras and the lights and the audio, and that will move over then into something that's not so much that way. One of the other events we've now had a repeat on was that first one I was referencing. That was the walk for Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. They have an annual Walk and Play LA Live event, and it usually is it's a peer-to-peer fundraising event. An awful lot of the fundraising happens ahead of time, where just like most peer-to-peers, where you go out and you get pledges and sponsors before you get to the day of the walk. But then the day of, rather than necessarily being this huge, I'm trying to fundraise on this day, it's sort of a culmination to to acknowledge the hard work that your donors have put in and your fundraisers have put in, and then also give them something really fun to kind of give back with at the same time. So their live event was scheduled this year, or last year and this year. As a matter of fact, they were trying to do live again this year and just weren't able to do it. Was scheduled for the Santa Monica Pier, and it has clinics with local sports guys, with folks from the LA Galaxy, you've got your hockey folks, your Kings, and all these different sports clinics where people can, family-friendly event, people can come in. There's a stage where the CEO usually gets up and acknowledges all the fundraisers, acknowledges them by name. It's a little bit of a competition. And then there's also hey, we're getting ready to do it's fitness oriented too. So we're getting ready to go do a walk. So there's a warm up and the whole routine. And so when they came to us last year and said, well, how can we do this? We actually created a series of events for the week. So since we couldn't redo those clinics, you can't have, we didn't have the Kings there showing you how to, do your hockey sticks. And so they actually pre-recorded something that they filmed in, and each day leading up to the event itself, we released a new clinic that kids could participate in. We planned it around after school time, so they'd be able to come home and join in the clinic. And then it was also pre-recorded content, so if they happened to miss the premiere of it, they could go back and watch it again later. And that all led up into the Saturday morning event. And the hospital made the decision at that time that they were really more comfortable. They were comfortable with allowing all different kinds of content. They really didn't want to spend, the first year especially, they weren't really wanting to send big crews out to be able to kind of respect that stay at home and distancing and all of those things. And at the same time, really just wanted everybody to be able to participate, whether they could come to a studio or whether they could watch or not. And so that event had a very different look to it. It wasn't that super polished look that we had for the Night of Dreams, but it was still very successful. So this is a small clip from this year's, and you can really see they were able to bring in Ellen Kay, who's a local radio host, and Sugar Ray Leonard, who we probably all know, and they were able to film kind of the host segments, and then they flipped off to things that were largely filmed from an iPhone. And it was a decision that they made that they felt comfortable with, and it worked out for them. So you'll be able to see in this next clip the more professionally produced right next to this came in on a cell phone, and see what that looks like.
Now you still have opportunities to give to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. You can make a donation on this website by clicking on the donate button, or text CHLA, all one word, to 243-725 to support impressive patient care. That's CHLA to 243-725. We're going to get things started with an energetic performance by recording artist and American Idol winner Lane Hardy. Let's give it up for you, Lane.
Hey y'all, my name's Lane Hardy. This is my song, Ground I Grew Up On. That ain't just dirt. That ain't just dust blowing.
So you can really get a feel for this was done in a studio versus this was, Lane in his backyard at a backwoods cabin, just good old country boy singing a song. And the quality was definitely different and noticeable from a production standpoint, but still very effective. People got to hear from Lane. Lane wasn't able to come in and film anything in the studio, and the event was really a combination of those things. And that was true for last year's event as well as this year's event. There was a little bit more opportunity to maybe film some things in person, but CHLA still decided, we really feel comfortable with this. And they got some extra greetings coming in where people, Justin Turner and his wife who are big supporters of CHLA, did a video, and they just held their cell phone up, and you could tell they were doing it, but they looked great and it worked out. So, it as much as we want to say, hey, it should always be, 4K quality, it may not be necessary. So I think it comes down to what your budget might be and what you're looking for. Is this something you're going to be using again and again? Obviously, the CHLA event is not really something they're going to be sending out over and over and over again. It's that the event happened, it's over, and then moving on. Whereas the Dream Center had 3 very comprehensive virtual tours, and they have gotten a lot of use out of the investment in those pieces that not only served their fundraiser, but also has been a great way to introduce the organization to new people throughout the year. So just a couple of different considerations there. And of course, when you're talking pre-recording, the question is, well, how do I get interaction? I mean, if I can't, if I can't get a question online, if I can't, speak to someone right then, how do I get interaction? And that might be something we can also touch on here as we move into talking about platforms. But there are lots of ways. Again, so much of the importance of it really is about pre-planning. If you are talking, if you plan out your program where you acknowledge, for example, I know that my top 5 fundraisers are going to be so and so throughout the event. You might be able to weave in their names and just say, oh, I see you. I think there were some teams in the CHLA one. So I was like, they had a DJ that started the event out, and he did shout outs to all the people. So it really felt like it was live. You can do the overlays, the graphic overlays of some kind, where you're acknowledging a question that might have come in, where you're acknowledging a specific donation of some kind, where you can even take some of the software out there today allows you to aggregate all the comments from Facebook and YouTube and Vimeo, and you can actually put them up on your video as it's going. So you could throw those kinds of comments in there. Many of these platforms today also have, have emojis and likes and things that you can do where you feel like you're interacting. And then if you get your staff ready to be able to answer questions in the comments and be able to really interact with the audience there as they're watching the program, you may be able to accomplish your goals that way as well. And I've seen that be very successful for quite a few people, quite a few of our production partners and clients over the last few years.
Hey, before we go into talking about platforms, because that's super important, talk for just a second about budget, because it almost seems like live would be probably the lowest budget. I mean, just intuitively. Mm-hmm. The hybrid almost sounds like it could be more expensive than pre-recorded. I don't know. Just what are some of the considerations that are cost considerations for nonprofits that are choosing, a format?
No, you're absolutely right. That your hunches there are more or less where things are, but it depends at the same time. One of our first, I would say, like live webinar type things in the pandemic era, they were very excited about live, and they were also very excited about 4K quality. They not only wanted to record in 4K, they wanted to broadcast in 4K. And it was a very complicated event from a production standpoint because they had 5 different speakers, and they were all across the country. So we had someone in the Pacific Northwest, we had someone in the Boston area, someone in Atlanta, someone in Southern California, and then also middle of the country. And they wanted 4K quality transmitted over the internet, live, big cameras, no iPhone. And that had quite the big budget. As you can imagine, you had to send crews and teams out to be there. Someone had to be able to push the buttons and do it just right and do all the setup and get the lighting in. So live can go that route. Or live can go something more along the lines of what we're doing right now, where we're both in our respective office places or wherever we decide to tune in from. But there was obviously some forethought that went into this process as well. We've got graphics, there's some investment in that. There's some software involved in what we're doing right this moment. But you can also forego all of that and just say, hey, I'm going to go live on Facebook and I can do it straight from my phone. So yes, that live does have the option of being maybe the most inexpensive, but it also does have the option of being or it does have the risk factor. It is by far the greatest risk for, whether your event's going to be successful or not. Now, hybrid event, you can really, it depends on how you decide to do it. If you want for example, like what the Dream Center did, where you were doing the virtual tour, and inside the virtual tour, obviously there was a team that was involved in that. It was produced with cameras and lights and audio and the whole routine. And so there's, you can imagine what a day of production would look like for there, filming and moving all around the city and doing the tour. So yes, there's certainly costs involved in that. And then they wanted it to really look like a stage presentation. So there was the location, setting the stage, doing the lighting in there. There were jibs, very, very high production value in the event overall. So that was a lot more expensive than it might have been had they just had people send in a bunch of pre-recorded content, which there was some of that as well. If you watch the whole event, there were a number of people who contributed very good looking pieces, but who contributed things that they had filmed elsewhere. And you can devise a hybrid strategy that can keep your budget lower. Just it depends on, again, that production value question, like what are you wanting to do with this later? Had the hospital, CHLA, decided that they wanted to do a hybrid event, they could have probably kept their budget pretty similar by making most of their content send in, or someone, it comes in for free. No one has to go film any of it. And then taking those dollars that they spent for, filming their two hosts, taking those dollars and investing them into the live portion instead. So that part could have been live. So there are ways to really work your way around it. And then pre-recording can also be incredibly expensive too, if you want it to be. It can be free because you just pulled together some content, and maybe you paid an editor for a couple hours worth of time, and maybe you didn't have a lot of motion graphics or anything like that, and it's just a very organic looking event. Or you really want it to look like 4K, and it's something you're going to use for the next 10 years. And so I think budget really comes out relative. Like, there are ways to do virtual events very economically, and then there are ways to do it where there's a lot of investment behind it. And so that question's super important to know ahead of time, and to devise a strategy that meets your budget.
What I really love about the pre-recorded is that you can have those assets for later, right? If you do a good job pre-recording them, you think through, they can have a shelf life that's pretty nice. You can dish them up on social media. You can, share them with folks, like a virtual tour or testimonies that you might prepare. You can give those pieces life through even fundraising appeals. So that's a really neat advantage of the pre-recorded.
It is.
Let's talk about platforms. Share with us about, we're free right now on Facebook and on YouTube. Talk to us about the options that we have for platforms.
Sure. So free, you can start out free. You can go with an account that you already have, your Facebook. You can go with YouTube. You can go with Vimeo. A lot of those options, you may have a paid version of the plan. You might have some pro features in Vimeo, but for the most part, they're entirely free, and they're great options. Some of the pros there are that you can possibly, if you have a good following already, like let's say you have a lot of YouTube subscribers, or there are a lot of people who follow your page, it kind of gives you a built-in audience already, and people who may see your content even without as much marketing as you might expect behind a regular event. But there are limitations as well. I think anybody who's been on Facebook or on YouTube would say they really, to interact on Facebook, you do need an account. You don't necessarily have to have an account to watch an event on Facebook, to watch a live. You can do both a premiere, which would be pre-recorded content that's played out as though it's live, or you can do a live Facebook, or like what we're doing, coming live right now. And it works great. People can be attached to it and listen to it, but it becomes complicated when you're looking at fundraising. I think most people really shy away from most larger nonprofits really shy away from fundraising on Facebook, because you don't get to keep your data, and half the idea is that you want to gain the donor and establish a relationship with them over time. And they may watch your event on Facebook, you may raise some money with them, but you don't have the opportunity to cultivate that relationship the same way that you would otherwise. Some of the other limitations might be if you're using YouTube. In order to comment on YouTube, you do have to have an account. So you can watch it, you can be a part of it, but you can't interact unless you log in with your YouTube account. And those things change all the time. So that could be something that's changed in the next, YouTube might change that tomorrow. But for right now, that's where the disadvantage might be of putting it on YouTube. So, there are pluses and minuses to all of those. And again, I think it comes back to answering those questions in the beginning. How do you really want your audience to participate? And one of the other disadvantages, I think, of the free options is it doesn't necessarily look like an event. It just looks like a video that you're watching on Facebook. Or, hey, I tuned into YouTube, I'm just watching a YouTube video, where you might want it to feel like a big event. Hey, we came to something. It was a special page. It's a thing we did. We registered for it. We got a ticket for it. Those sorts of things. So free certainly is free and fits a lot of budgets and gives you some opportunities and advantages. But you also might look at a hybrid strategy where you did pay for a platform of some kind, but then you also rebroadcast on or made it available to folks on Facebook or YouTube. One other thing I really do like about Facebook or YouTube as being your options to transmit are that you might reach a larger audience too. If you can encourage people who follow you already to share it on their own pages, or they just happen to be scrolling through and find something, you may pick up a few new supporters that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So there are some advantages to free, for sure. After free, I think from our perspective, for most of the people who work directly with Brewer and who are our clients as well, they're looking for something that's fundraising oriented. Something that can maybe integrate with their fundraising platforms, or where they can capture all of the data, or whether it directly ties into their CRM. And there are platforms out there for that. they've grown a lot and changed a lot over the last year and a half. When at the time, for example, of doing the Night of Dreams event for Dream Center, there were very few options. We went with GiveSmart, which I'm assuming a lot of people are familiar with, but GiveSmart recognized that it was necessary to offer virtual events. Hey, how do we tie in a virtual event piece into the fundraising we already have, whether it's peer-to-peer, whether it's silent auction items, things like that. And at the time, they were really, from my estimation, the only game in town when it came to pulling in a silent auction. There are limitations from it. It's an afterthought. It wasn't I planned this platform to cater to virtual events. It was how do we pull virtual events into the platform that we already have, and you can feel a little of that on the difference. You can say, oh gosh, this isn't quite as sophisticated as some of those other virtual event platforms out there. But at the same time, from a nonprofit perspective, it might actually be more exciting to you because it does integrate. It's fundraising friendly. That's what it's for. You get your built-in web page. You can have tickets for people come, whether they pay for the tickets or not. That's all incorporated into it. You attend the event. Over on the side, like you've got your video box where you're watching the event, and it always stays right there, even as you're scrolling on the side and looking what your silent auction events are or what your fundraising options might be. And across the bottom, there's a donate button, and makes it easy. Sometimes there are limitations over how people are tuning in, whether they're able to watch only from their computer or whether they're really able to watch better from a phone. At the time, GiveSmart was a little bit limited in the phone department. The video just kind of got a little too small. Like I said, those things, they're changing so constantly because everybody's trying to win the pandemic game. And so all the platforms are catching up. So again, it changes all the time. You can do a ton of research today on platforms, come back in a month and be like, oh my gosh, here are 10 more I didn't even know existed. So
they sound like they're getting more and more sophisticated. How is that from the user side? So we know that for a lot of donors, they're over 65 years old. Some of them are all the way up in the 80s. They want to make a gift. They want to watch. They know how to click to watch, but then there's all this activity happening around them. I'm assuming they're just going to like write a check and send it in. But are they getting too sophisticated for users?
Sometimes they are. When we were picking a platform, for example, I'm just going to stick with the same examples we've already given for context, but when we were working on the platform for Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, the first year we chose Facebook. It was, you could just premiere a video there. You didn't have to have an account to get on. But nonetheless, there were still a few people who had trouble because they didn't realize I can just X out of the box that says, hey, I don't need an account and I can just watch this. And they're like, oh, I'm not on Facebook, so I can't attend, when they really could have, but they just didn't know to X out of the box and say, hey, I'd like to keep watching without an account. Yeah. Then the thought was, well, maybe we do YouTube because they have a pretty significant YouTube following. But the idea of having you can go watch a video there, but you can't comment or interact without having an account. And fewer of their followers had accounts versus the other. And so YouTube was out then too. Not wanting to register for being able to comment. And the idea was we just have to make this as simple as possible, like no issues whatsoever. So we ended up embedding it into their website. We used Vimeo. Vimeo Live has some interesting features to be able to do pre-recorded or live, and to be able to incorporate a chat. The chat's a little more limited than what you can get in Facebook. There aren't emojis. You can't pin things to the top. So there were limitations, but all things considered, they went that route instead, so that you didn't have to have an account to chat. So it was just embedded straight in their page, and all their folks only had to just click a link and go straight there. And that was, in their list of priorities, more important for the CHLA than some of the bells and whistles that you get with the other platforms. It was less about money and more about, is this user friendly for our audience?
Yeah.
So it's a significant consideration. GiveSmart was fairly simple, but you did want to encourage people to register ahead of time, because you want them to be ready to give right away. If they're already ahead of time have registered and put their credit card in at the night of, if they want to give, they just say, hey, boom, I want to give, and they're good to go. So that was one of the options there. I would also say too, for the bigger platforms that are out that really were virtual event friendly, like they were designed just for virtual events. I find the threshold, it seems very simple if you have registered for accounts before. It seems very, very simple, but you really have to think through every single step of it. Like, I need to register here. And so I go register for, like, let's take Hopin. That's a pretty popular platform. It had been around even before the pandemic, and now it's really been souped up for events. It's less for fundraising, although you can certainly use it for that platform. It's more for conferences and help getting interaction between your guests and things along those lines. And while it has a fairly simple, clean interface, like nice white big buttons tell you what to do, there can be a hurdle even for the registration for the site, because if you are registering for let's say Brewer wants to host an event and they do it through Hopin. If you're registering through the Brewer's Hopin, you're not going to get an email from Brewer that says, hey, you're registered. You get an email from Hopin that says, hey, you're now registered for the platform. So they're just they're little small nuances and considerations, but you really have to walk through the entire user experience and decide, does this fit the way that our audience interacts with us? And that kind of goes back to that earlier question about who is your audience and how do they interact with you now? If they're giving online all the time, if they're using emails, if they're really big followers of your social media accounts, you probably have a little bit more leeway. If they're sending in checks and reading your direct mail and that's the way they're interacting, you might want to consider a different way. And if you do decide to go with one of those more souped up platforms, and there are dozens of them now, Hopin was one, Bizaboo, VFairs. I mean, there are hundreds at this point, and news that come out every week. SpotMe is another one that has a lot of really cool bells and whistles. If you do decide to go that route, you will pay for it. They are quite pricey. Sometimes the options that you want are in the $20,000 range to be able to really take advantage of a lot of their options. Some of them have free options, or they sound free, like, oh, I only have to pay for a quarter, but then they are limited in how many people can attend and how they can interact, what features of the platform you can really use. So, and then I find a disadvantage of those to be from a fundraising platform or fundraising perspective is they don't interact as easily for giving. They don't connect as easily to your CRMs and things along those lines. So there are a lot of options out there. But I think the main two considerations are, how does this serve the nature of my event and my audience? Can they interact the way that I want them to without, technological hurdles? And, does this fit my budget?
Yeah, functionality and budget for sure. And there, with so many tools out there, and obviously with the pandemic, and it's not over yet, but hopefully we're moving closer to the end of this. But the whole idea is that these virtual events, they've taken hold, and people can realize, gosh, I don't have to get all dressed up and get into traffic to go to this event. I can sit here in my pajamas and watch the event. So there still will be a market for all that. I want to get to talking about that, but one of the other things that I experienced with virtual events was swag bags and meals delivered and cool gifts that would come in advance, kind of warming you up to the event. Talk to us a little bit about that. Some of the engagement devices that you can use in an event like this.
For sure. And I think coming back to those questions at the beginning, is you really have to ask yourself, like, what is the nature of your event? Is this something that you've done before? Is your audience used to getting a swag bag from you? Are they expecting a sit-down dinner when they come to your gala? Or is it a run or a walk and they usually get a t-shirt that you could still mail the t-shirt out to them? Or are there snacks and treats that they might usually get? And so, again, if you have that solid answer to your question and sort of understand what your event is and what the expectation from the audience is, then you can match things up. Budget is always a consideration. If you're going to send out really amazing swag bags and kits and things like that ahead of time, do you have the dollars for that? Is that something you were already going to do anyways, and now you just have to add in the shipping? So budget obviously is a big consideration when it comes to that. But there are lots of ways to be creative too. Like you could say, hey, we invite you to sit down for dinner with us, and here's a free delivery off Uber Eats on us tonight, and you can partner with Uber Eats and get a coupon code for that. And so that way, maybe you're not spending a whole lot on the delivery fee, and people are buying their own food. Or maybe you say if you do want to send stuff but you want to keep it lower, maybe you go with the Saturday morning coffee event. Like, hey, coffee's on us today. Head out to Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it is, or have delivery to we'll send coffee to you. Maybe you send them a pound of coffee. I think there are lots of ways to do it, and I would say be as creative as possible. Use local partnerships and sponsors. There are a lot of people right now looking for extra business. Restaurants who might want the extra takeout business who would say, hey, I'll put together a plan for you for the night. Like, you pick steak or chicken and you can come and order off the menu and we'll only charge you $10 a plate for it as opposed to 50 that it might cost otherwise. So I would say if you want to add in those extra bells and whistles, they're nice. They really are. But it kind of depends on, is it necessary? Does it really enhance what you're trying to do? And if the answer to that is yes, if it really just goes the extra mile and is going to help you serve your goals a little bit more, then absolutely try to incorporate them.
Worth the effort. Yeah.
But it may not be necessary too. I mean, I've been through a series of these and I've seen both giveaways and no giveaways and they've both gone very, very well. So answering the questions to those considerations in the beginning really helps you make these decisions a whole lot easier.
So we only have 10 more minutes. I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, make sure you submit those questions. They're going to come to us. I know I've been asking a lot of questions, kind of stealing all the time here, but if you have questions, make sure you get those in. If you have questions later, make sure you reach out to us. But we have 10 more minutes and I want you to spend some time. We've spent all this time talking about virtual events. What's the future of virtual events? What do you see and what are the trends out there in terms of this, living beyond the pandemic?
Sure. Well, I'm going to steal a line from Rhonda from the last webinar and just say, if I could just have my crystal ball right now, I would love to say exactly. But I think from what we've seen and what I've seen and working with these organizations and seeing their audiences come in, I don't think virtual events are going anywhere. Well, a couple of reasons why. One, we're still firmly in the pandemic. I wish we weren't. I wish I could say that we were another way, but it's a heightened topic. It's one that people feel very differently about. Everybody's comfort level with going in or staying out, everybody's got a different comfort level. And I would think, especially if your goal is fundraising and holding your constituents, keeping them tied to your organization, you want to be really careful to not do something that could possibly turn them off. Like if the only way for them to participate were to come in person, but I'm elderly, I decided not to get vaccinated and I don't feel comfortable being in person, then you might turn somebody off and they say, hey, you might get their feelings hurt. Or if you decide to only go virtual, it's pretty hard. It's a lot harder to, hurt someone's feelings. If you decide to go the hybrid route where you are looking at doing something in person, but you're also offering the other side of things, you just keep it where you're not excluding anybody. And I think it's going to be a while, even once maybe the risk goes down, or depending on how things continue to progress, it may be a while before people feel really comfortable getting together in big gatherings again. And that might limit what your in-person options are. So I think even just from that standpoint, not so much how our culture has changed or any of those things, I think it's going to be a while before we really can just go back to big live events the way that we have before without running the risk of isolating some people, alienating some other ones, or, God forbid, there was an outbreak of COVID with people who attended your event. Like that also has its downers too. There's a lot of risk, especially from the nonprofit perspective, I think, in pushing to something where your only opportunity to participate is live.
That's something really powerful. The fact that I can participate in one of our clients' runs all the way across the country because I'm doing a virtual run. What did Children's Hospital of LA say about their event? Because their event was just like, there's so much power in being on Santa Monica Pier and having all these activities and all these clinics with sports, activities. Are they going to switch when we get to switch, or are they going to live in both worlds?
At the current moment, and of course things change all the time, but at the current moment when we wrapped up after this one, they said, I think we're going to need to live in both worlds. I mean, we're super anxious to get back out again and we're excited about it, but we had a lot of engagement that we don't want to overlook, just because, people may not want to get up on a Saturday morning. They may not want to go out to Santa Monica Pier on Saturday unless they live right there. Maybe they live out in the outskirts of LA and it's a big drive. I mean, they saw the merits of a hybrid event for sure, and are looking at incorporating that into the coming year. And I think that's another thing that, and you kind of touched on it too, the beauty of being able to participate in an event from your pajamas. You're sitting on your own couch, you're eating your own food, you're not necessarily going anywhere, you don't have to have the travel time and the parking and all the associated things with it, and you can still be a part of something. You give yourself a larger audience. You might not have been able, people who would have would not have come to a live event may attend a virtual event. It's easier. It's a lower threshold. And I think there's power in that. And like you said, there are a lot of folks who, some of us don't like it at all. We're anxious to get back out and do things, and we want to be places, and we just, one more virtual thing, just no. And other people are, for this, the greatest thing ever. Like I can still be social and participate and do all these things, and I can do it right here from my computer. So those folks especially are going to want to continue to participate virtually, and they might be turned off by having to go in person for something still. And so if it's within your means to do it, I don't see why you wouldn't offer that hybrid option, at least for the foreseeable future, for all of the reasons we've just gone over. And then also the idea of just being able to potentially expand your audience in a way that you couldn't have before.
Yeah. I think we're hankering to get back together, face-to-face communication, being with one another again, wrapping your arms around folks. There's so much wonder in that. And I'm hoping that we don't get lazy and decide to stay home just because we're lazy. But I do see tremendous value in these events moving forward. And everything I've read in industry papers and so forth says that virtual events are here to stay. So
Yeah,
I don't know if there are any questions out there. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and there's ways to be creative too. Maybe you go back to your live events that you've done before. Like maybe you've got a gala that you go to every year, or that you invite people to, and you're so excited to do that finally, get back together in person. But maybe you supplement your event strategy with something that is virtual that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise. Maybe you would have, maybe you can pull in an educational piece, or maybe you can do a virtual run or a walk that you maybe didn't want to have an extra event. But you might be able to get more bang for your buck, or bring in more folks, or raise more funds, or offer more exciting opportunities if you do a combo strategy moving forward.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Steffi, thank you for sharing with us. Your expertise in this area of virtual events has been just really enlightening and exciting. It's been great information. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you for being here, joining us on these new platforms. We hope you thought it was, new and innovative and a little bit different presentation. Steffi's put together a takeaway document that we're going to be emailing out to each of you shortly after the webinar. So you'll have, I think it's your list of questions, right, to help people think through what they need to think through as they're approaching a decision about a virtual event. If you have any questions, you need some help with your upcoming virtual event, please reach out to your strategist, or feel free to reach out to me directly. And I just want to thank you for joining us. This is our final webinar of the season. I hear everybody moaning and complaining. This is our final webinar of the season. We will be starting up again with a new webinar series and new and exciting topics in early 2022. So be on the lookout for more word on those in the coming months. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a blessed day. If you have questions, again, don't forget, we're here waiting for you. All right, enjoy the day. God bless.
Thanks for having me.
It's a joy. Thanks so much.